Today, we're meeting with a group of executives, exchanges in the Asean community. Here to introduce us to them is Nandini Sukumar, CEO of the WFE, the World Federation of Exchanges. Good morning, Nandini, and everyone else.
Good morning, Sally. Thank you for having us all. I'm delighted to be here today with three dynamic executives from the ASEAN exchange community, and of course, my colleague Victoria Powell, who leads on ESG at the WFE. The focus of our conversation today, we thought, would be around transition finance, which is such a key part of the WFE's ESG work and such a key part of the exchange ESG work at the moment. As you know, we're going to have something on the 5th of June in Toronto. We're convening our members, and we're going to be talking a lot about transition finance. But ahead of that, just to set out briefly the stage, transition planning is really very fundamental to the overhaul of our economies, to getting to that place of being green and sustainable. Exchanges are playing a key role, both in financing the transition, but also in supporting issuers in their own transition planning, as my colleagues on the call today will tell you. We need these transition plans to be coherent and measurable if they are to be useful to investors and avoid greenwashing. While we're on the subject of greenwashing, which is, as you know, one of the largest issues right now, a problem to solve, everyone in this meeting today is playing a role in helping eradicate greenwashing. At the WFE, we have the green equity principles, which were created partly with the members on this call, but this defines, at high level with principles, what constitutes green equity, and we have supporting guidance, etc. And I'm sure all of that's going to be covered in discussions today. We've brought together here on this call with you some of the leaders of ESG from some of our ASEAN members, and we wanted to highlight this region specifically as there are a number of very interesting initiatives and collaborative and cooperative efforts between these exchanges that I'm going to ask them to share with you. So let me introduce briefly the speakers today. Maybe you can put your hands up as I call your name out. There's Dr. Soraphol Tulayasathien, Head of Corporate Strategy Division and Head of Sustainable Market Development at the Stock Exchange of Thailand. There's Dr. Hezri Adnan, Director of Group Sustainability at Bursa Malaysia. And then there's Laurent Poirot, Head of Product Strategy and Development at SGX, the Singapore Exchange. And then, last but certainly not least, is our very own Victoria Powell from the WFE, Senior Manager and ESG Lead. So Sally, let me turn in the first instance back to you to take this conversation further.
Okay, thank you, Nandini, for that introduction. I think how we'd like to start this conversation is just kind of set the stage for us who aren't really aware of what's happening in Asia, in the Asian community. And Lauren, why don't you get started? Why don't you tell us what's going on in the transition finance planning arena in your world?
Sure. I guess it will take me a lot of time to cover everything, but let's do as simply as possible. First, basically, the view about Asia is probably changing a little bit. Over the previous 10 to 15 years, people have been looking at Asia as an emerging marketplace where basically it was difficult to talk about transition just because of actually the natural dynamics from an economic point of view in the region. But at the same time, because of the growth, there is a lot of interest, right? So capital actually needs to move in the region. At the same time, the awareness around actually climate changes has also improved just because every country is concerned by the change of climate. So then comes to the question is who has to move first, right? And there is no actually clear answer here. Everybody needs to move together in order actually to move the right amount of capital to make the change happening. And this is where the exchange basically has its full role to play. Obviously, being in Singapore, in Asia, we want to be able actually to also play a very collaborative role because we can't solve the problem on our own. So a lot of the initiatives that are happening obviously happens in a way that basically is pretty open, whether it's about basically the discussions around taxonomy or basically what exchanges themselves do. So then basically companies don't get lost and global investors basically find value in what actually each exchange is actually delivering.
Very good. Thank you. Would anyone else like to build on that statement?
Yeah, perhaps I could just give a general comment to Laurent. One of the things I think is interesting is that since we've had a lot of attention placed on green products, etc., we've now recognized that actually to meet the Paris Agreement, we need to transition the whole economy. And that's a lot more complex. It was easier to define what is green, and even then there are challenges. But in order to really meet the targets, we're going to have to move all of the companies along a continuum towards transition. And therefore, the frameworks and how you encourage financing to those areas is a lot more sophisticated and has to take into account where that company is at the start and what its potential transition plan could be, and therefore measure exactly where they are now to where they could be. And as we move towards 2050 and the closing deadline, there will be changes between sectors as to which ones will need to be shrunk, which ones will need to completely change, and those which will remain as part of that. But it's really important that we must recognise that in order to achieve a green or aligned with sustainable economy in the future, we can't just completely ignore the existing basis for everything that is developed, and we need to plan that transition carefully so that manufacturers, etc., can find replacements, can gradually improve their processes, and everyone moves along that continuum successfully. And I think that's why this is such an interesting topic to have now. And it's slightly more challenging than just pushing money towards encouraging green alternatives. And it requires a lot more nuance in how we go about doing that and the products that we develop for that purpose. But one of the ways that we have started that process is that in Asia, you've done a great deal more in terms of taxonomies. And I don't know if perhaps Dr. Hezri, you're in a position to talk about the Asian taxonomy, but also Malaysia has its own taxonomy. And I think those were kind of one of the pillars upon which that cooperation has worked. And one of the things that I think is particularly interesting is we think of Europe working as a region together, but Asian countries have been doing a huge amount together to collaborate. Maybe Dr. Hezri, if you're in a good position, you can start to share some of the initiatives as you see them.
Thank you, Victoria. Hello, Sally and everyone. Definitely, Southeast Asia is a very important region. Just to latch on to the earlier conversation about why this region is important. In the fuel mix, coal is pretty much still important in the region, and we are still grappling with the need to close the gap, because if you look at the statistics from 2000 to 2018, fossil fuels accounted for about 85% of the growth in the primary energy demand in the ASEAN region. So there is this baseline issue that we're facing. I think some countries in the region have started to recognize this pretty early. Malaysia, for instance, started to look at the need for financing renewable energy way back in 2010. The government launched the Green Technology Financing Scheme, a soft loan program in 2010. But the take-up a couple of years after it was launched was very, very slow, because the banks apparently were not very sufficiently familiar with the risks involved. what constitute green technology was not, clearly understood among the officials in the banking fraternity. And that's why I think Bank Negara Malaysia, the central bank, and its counterpart have started to look at how to organize this space better by introducing a call for developing a taxonomy way back in 2019. So, and from that consultation, then it launched the climate change principle-based taxonomy in 2021. And that defined the kind of areas that banking should be investing their efforts into. I thought, so it started with that recognition that there's a problem, and then there was a solution without understanding how, the whole sector, the whole ecosystem can respond. And there was no ecosystem, so to speak, back then. So I guess that's where we started with the taxonomy. And then now we're on the stage of refining the taxonomy for bonds and also moving into the separate, the different sectors, so it can be further clarified. As far as the sort of financial products available, they tend to be predominantly focused on what is familiar, like solar technology. So this taxonomy is encouraging the banks to move into areas which are underinvested. So I guess that's where, as far as the framework is concerned, I stop there for now.
That seems to be the movement here in the United States into transition financing is thought of. It's kind of morphed a little bit. So it's really about going into infrastructure areas that can be developed. That seems to be the sweet spot for U.S. investors, or at least from what I read, that's what I'm hearing about. But it sounds like you have a more comprehensive approach. I mean, over here in the United States, there's been a lot of pushback against too much planning, I guess, is what you would say. But it sounds to me from my research that planning is of the essence, and that it can really make a difference in everybody working together and moving together. Would you agree with that, everyone? Anyone?
It certainly helps, doesn't it? I think to have a kind of vision for the entire economy and to think about some of those elements and how they fit together. And I think actually in that sense, Laurent, one of the experiences you've had in Singapore, right, has been that the government has been quite proactive in terms of forward planning and trying to transition the entire economy and asking and encouraging transition plans to be developed. And that's a very good way for everyone to feel part of that journey. Rather than just focusing on, let's say, the solar or those elements alone. And I understand they also did a very nuanced taxonomy in Singapore. But then, in addition to that, as I said, the transition plans. Can you share a little bit about that? And then I think in Thailand, there's also some interesting initiatives that we could go on to next.
Yeah. So I think again, it's back to my initial point about how do you get all the parts moving together, right? So if you take an approach that is just actually to focus on one particular part of the value chain, then basically you first take the risk of creating disruption. Then basically you will be led to react. And then basically not all the sectors will be able actually to move at the same speed because they don't have the right incentives, right? And the incentives must become natural. And in the capital market, the incentives come from actually the financing channel, right? So while as an exchange, we can set a lot of rules, what matters is actually for having all the rules understood by all the economic actors. And this is where typically it's powerful to have a taxonomy that is understandable by every single actor. And the traffic light actually approach taken actually by the MAS is on the back of a lot of consultation, right, with the different actors, in order actually to get some form of basic alignments, right? Who basically is already moving, who is already aligned, who will not move. And then you don't ignore them, but basically you look at those sectors or those companies and you say, okay, what will it take for you basically to convert, right? And this approach is obviously a little bit long to implement because it requires a lot of dialogue. But ultimately, the motivation to achieve a framework that is implementable actually is a success. And this is where we are today, right? Where basically we have the taxonomy, we have a plan actually to help companies disclose also their sustainability, to make their these sustainability disclosures. And then for investors, they will just see actually that there is more and more transparency in Asia, right? Mm-hmm. So those are concrete steps that an exchange can enable, right? But ultimately, we need the company to play their part. We need actually to bring systems so then companies actually can disclose. So as an exchange, what we do also is we do a lot of education, right? In the region, we need to bring skills. And again, it's not too much of the job of an exchange to bring those skills, right? But by feeding back those comments, often actually from the companies, then basically we can get some support, right? From the government and basically the regulator. So then again, there is an incentive to go faster on the journey of the transition. Does it answer your point or?
Yeah.
Very good. Yes, thank you.
Get about the product, because the product is probably something we can talk a little bit later, because that's the result of all this work. But first, we need the work and the data to be made available.
One thing I was thinking, actually, Dr. Soraphol, in Thailand as well, could you update a little bit? You were telling us a little bit earlier of the initiatives that Thailand is taking to encourage the entire economy to transition.
Well, I think to have the whole process of encouraging the transition economy into more green, you need 4 steps. The first is to build awareness. The second is to build capability of the companies for them to know what to do. And the third is to measure on the progress of what they're doing. And the last one is to give the incentive for company to do that. So that means you have products. Of course, a lot of conversation, as Sally mentioned, that we don't want it to be just planning. The planning is the first 2 steps, right? Awareness and capability building. So all the workshop, all the seminar. But the real work is on the measurement and on the what a lot of people here, we are all saying that we need more data, we need more taxonomy so that everyone speak on the same language on what is green and what is not, and what is different shade of greens. So a lot of the effort has been done, and I think we cannot do it alone, because a lot of our company, we are supply chain of each other. So we not only to speak the same language within the country, but we do need to speak the same language within the country that are connected, and that's where the ASEAN stepped in. So on this front, for the Stock Exchange of Thailand, we have worked in conjunction with other regulators, the Bank of Thailand, our central bank, and the Security and Exchange Commission. We are doing the taxonomy. We finished 2 sectors and we have 6 sectors more to go. So we are catching up very fast. And we have built a platform for listed company, and hopefully the supply chain to deposit the data, so that at least there's some data that is readily available, machine readable. And to close the loop, we try to bring it as far as possible into the product or incentive space, so that there would be demand, and that would give the company some positive value on what they have been doing or why they should transform. One example that we did last year was that our Ministry of Finance, they gave the tax incentive. This one is for if individual invest in mutual fund that invest in Thai company that have disclosed carbon data and have committed to some sort of the net zero goal with their data being verified by third party. So it's quite a tough criteria. Then they would get incentive for the investment in such fund. They can deduct from their taxable income. So this year is the 2nd year of that incentive, and I have received a lot of requests from listed company that I want to be in the list. So now I will do more carbon reduction. I will want to declare some commitment. So you can see that none of this is possible without the previous step, but you have to close the loop that you need data, you need the taxonomy, and you need some sort of sweetener to make people joining in.
That's really interesting.
Good
One of
idea.
the things that Dr. Soraphol, you mentioned there, is that you also have third-party assessment. And I think that's
Yeah.
also a really crucial element in terms of
Because
saying,
we are very mindful of the greenwashing backlash. Of course, we want to start and make sure and try to work with the data that we are most comfort with. So we focus on the company that have the third-party verification of the carbon emission. Very small sample of company, only 64 of them, but hopefully the list will increase as they see the benefit from doing so, given the incentive from the government.
that's brilliant. Sally, I don't want to interrupt any further questions you might have.
I'm happy to hear your observations, Victoria, at this point.
Yeah, I think one of the things that both Laurent and Dr. Hezri and Soraphol have noted is the importance of data, because as you have a transition plan, you need to have the data to show your progress against that, and that will continually move because it will be a journey towards 2050, and you need to keep showing continued improvement. And I think there is going to be a great deal of pressure on companies and issuers in Asia, but across the world, as a result of European requirements, for example, to report on their supply chain. So they will be asking for this data. And I think we'll see more and more pressure to have this data being as accurate as possible. And I think that's one of the real challenges, but also the benefits we're seeing that, sometimes one region moves ahead, but it has a kind of butterfly effect on the other economies, which is impactful. And what I think is encouraging is the way in which in the Asian economies, they are sharing the data amongst themselves as well, and really building a language in the region that can encourage that.
Can you explain a little bit about the data and how it's collected and what the role of the exchanges is in that?
Which of you would like to do that?
Maybe I can take it as the example of what happened actually with SGX, right, and with ES Genome. So basically, as an exchange, we took the responsibility to build actually the infrastructure and basically to connect actually the companies to the infrastructure, to do education, and then also to keep it open. So then basically we could share feedback on how actually to make it easier, but where basically companies can gain confidence that basically this is not a one-off. This effort basically will yield actually to some benefits down the road, because obviously it will bring some form of transparency. And then again, investor will reward the companies that basically are on the right track based on actually the investor objectives, right? If investors basically don't value transition finance, then obviously those data will not be used. But if they come to use those data, then basically they will be actually rewarding actually those companies. Once actually we do it in our market, that's good, but that's not enough for global investors, right? And just actually this morning, you have actually a US pension funds that came with basically explaining that it's difficult to report their own actually carbon footprint because data come at different time. They have actually some form of lags. So then basically doing a simple addition is not easy. So if basically we are capable to bring some form of homogeneity across exchanges, then obviously it will facilitate the people who are the expert in collecting the data and making them used actually by the investor. So this is basically what actually the effort is about. Obviously, every economy has a different also sector footprint, right? So that means certain economy may have a different actually vision about what should be the right things to disclose and so on. So here we need to find a common set of factors that are enough for bringing value for the investors or the data providers, but basically don't disincentivize a company to participate, because that will be actually the downside, right? Where you go with something that is too pure, too nice, but basically not everybody is joining it, right? So this is basically through collaboration, again, with our partner exchanges here in the region, that we can have an impact. And ultimately, those facilities will go at the one global level, right? That's the project with the NZDPU. But this takes, again, quite a lot of effort to achieve. Mm-hmm. But as you can see, every country is actually making the effort to incentivize companies to disclose on the same standards, where basically taxonomy start being a little bit reshuffled. So then basically they speak the same principles. Then basically we can achieve actually a common place for data.
Mm-hmm. But that data, right, is so critical because it's also helping investors to identify within those companies that are making the transition where there is actually alpha to be gained, and where there is, if they're identifying the right companies, then they can invest in those companies that in the future will be future-proof. So there will be a kind of virtuous cycle in that sense. I was wondering, Dr. Hezri, do you have any indication in terms of in Malaysia where how the situation is on data, and that's what you'd like to share?
Thank you, Victoria. As an exchange, Bursa Malaysia has taken a gradual approach in terms of getting the listed companies to disclose their material matters. We have about 1,000 companies listed on Bursa Malaysia now, and a couple of years back, the listing requirements has been enhanced, and also the sustainability reporting framework has also been enhanced, and it has we have demanded for more information on 11 criteria. And this year, 2024, for sustainability reporting 2023, is the first time that the sustainability reports of all the listed companies, the relevant listed companies, will have to incorporate ESG data. And I think there are about 22 mandatory indicators that need to be reported in the sustainability report. Not in the appendix, but in the main text, if you like. So, of course, as we move further, then climate data will be more important. And this is where I think once we have better clarity on S2 or the ISSB International Sustainability Standards Board S2 climate report, that will demand more granular information on climate. And again, I think we will take a phased approach, not making the companies to report overnight, but to give them some time to prepare for their data capability.
For Thailand, it's very similar. Last year, 2023, is the first year that our regulator requires some disclosure of the ESG data. But for exchange, we go beyond the required ESG data, so we add more data item that we want our listed company to disclose. But to facilitate the disclosure of data, we build a platform, electronic platform, that company can do one input and is spit out into the report that regulator require, or some other report that may come in the future. For example, the IFRS S1, S2, whatever. This year, we're going to the phase 2 of the data platform. So we increase the number of required data that in the first phase is 66 items. It's going to go to 133 items. So you may think it's a lot, but we try to cover as many sectors, and some sector may only relevant to some subset of that 133. So it's not that many. So incentive, what we give them some reduction in the listing fee that our exchange charge. So we actually try to convince them, and it actually worked quite well, because the first year 75% of the listed company, we have around 900 companies, so 75% of them enter some sort of data, but I must admit that very few have the data that are verified that I mentioned to you, but that should be more later on. Another thing that I think is a quite good development is that among the ASEAN exchange, Bursa SGX included, and also Indonesia exchange, we came up with something called the ASEAN common metrics of the ESG data. So we have some common items that are comparable across of the exchange. So we have, I would say, worked together for 3 years and finalized the common metrics among the ASEAN exchange last year. So this year we are hoping to get some of the large company data of each of the exchange to do a pilot to disclose in the same manner so that it's comparable. So this is something that we are doing. Bursa actually help leading the integration of the carbon ecosystem. Maybe Bursa can help elaborate more on that. But for the stock exchange and SDX, we also work with all the ASEAN exchange to, as I mentioned to you, that we are the same supply chain, so we need to have some common language.
Yeah, just to latch on to what our colleagues just mentioned about the need for data. So what we have introduced, the regulatory arm of Bursa Malaysia has introduced is just minimal set of information for ESG reporting. But as the landscape is getting more complex, particularly for companies that are involved in exporting their products to Europe, for instance, more information is needed in anticipation of the carbon border tax mechanisms and all the other regulations. So we are mindful of the complexity of the impending regulatory landscape. So we are coming up with a centralized systems intelligence platform, pretty much like what Singapore is also doing. And this will enable companies to report also on scope 3, so not just scope 1, scope 2. And this is, we thought, it's important to get this platform going and getting the whole ecosystem, not just to provide data, but also to bring the capability, so bringing in the consultants, the management firms together to bring the capability of not just reporting, but also to move towards net zero and also perhaps absolute zero in the future. So really, we're building the economy based on green principles, but this is a long-term play.
Laurent, do you want to share something further in terms of the products, and then we could just, or some closing remarks from each person?
Yeah, I guess once actually we have covered the topic of data and we all agree that it's moving in the right direction, there are actually clear dates for companies actually to report, and there is more and more clarification. Obviously, the role of an exchange is also to make sure that investors pay attention, right? That investors are aware that basically more and more data, so then basically they can play actually, I would say, with the data to define actually products that are also aligned with the transition, right? And here basically at SGX, we started working on such a product in 2021, when basically the world was still actually in COVID, focused still actually on excluding sectors to achieve immediate decarbonization. So basically focusing at getting a green portfolio. And then you had also Paris-aligned methodologies that were somehow also excluding, but also forcing some form of decarbonization at the portfolio level. And then we took the opposite approach, is to say basically, if we want to solve for transition, we need to focus more at the companies. And then the portfolio will be the result of what the companies are doing, right? And this is, for instance, an example of a change of approach to investment that can lead actually to passive investment. It can lead actually to derivatives, and we have some, but at least we provide a transition-focused solution to investors, right? And last year, basically, we could see that immediately, globally, that methodology has been used in US, in Europe, in Japan, also in Asia, Japan. While in 2021, people were telling us Asia is not investable for transition. And asset owners basically said, actually, I know Asia. I'm not afraid of investing into emerging economies. And basically, I know that basically those companies are doing the job of transitioning. So this methodology helped me actually accessing to them, right? So if we scale up such approach, then basically that means capital actually should be flowing where basically it will have the largest impact. Because ultimately, if we want to do the transition, there is no point to allocate more capital to companies that have actually a very low carbon footprint, right? They will be valued for other things, but not from a transition point of view. So it's all about basically bringing to the table products that are aligned with all the efforts that we do downstream to collect actually the data, right? So this is an example. Another example is obviously with transition, you've got new trade flows. So new trade flows, they are actually carrying the same risk as existing trade flows. There is no actually, whether it's green or brown, basically it does not change the risk attached to the trade flows. So obviously with the new economy, for instance, electric vehicles, you have actually demand for new commodities. So the demand is growing, risk of financing the trade is growing, demand for hedging is there. So then actually as an exchange, it's also part of our job to bring those new tools for actually the producers, the hedgers on the table. So then basically they can transition their portfolio, right? And this is basically what will define our common success or not. Are we capable to transition all our portfolios to this new economy? Or are we just going actually to make it look green, but the fundamentals are not changing? So we need products, right? But we need also products that basically do the job and are aligned with what we ask the companies to do.
Laurent, that was really helpful. But to achieve that then, is that where you're looking at the transition plans playing a key role and assessment of those plans? Because I think it's important, isn't it, if companies do show they're transitioning and they produce a transition plan, for that to be an encouragement, not to be a concern that there is, when those transition plans need to keep shifting because they will, or they can't be reached, but something else is done instead to adapt and to move. You want to encourage those issuers to share those plans publicly anyway, and not disincentivize that, because as you say, we need to have a very inclusive approach for transition.
So as companies are disclosing more data, they become more transparent as well, right? So as a matter of fact, because they know actually what they are producing, they can set for themselves targets, right? And then because they continue to disclose, those targets can be controlled, right, on an ongoing basis, right? In our case, the key questions we tried to solve was, are companies committed? And then when you issue a transition plan, obviously, it's a little bit like the green capex concept, is basically you promise to follow a certain trajectory, but nobody knows if you will be able to meet those targets, right? But we can also look a little bit backward, because the data start being made available, to see if the company is already engaged on a journey. So even if the company is not structuring a very nice actually transition plan, maybe the company is already transitioning, and the market should already acknowledge this effort for transitioning. So you see, basically behind the concept of transition plan, there is basically, yes, formalization of basically the expected trajectory. But what matters is being able also to see if companies are already on the journey or not. And if you do it basically within a sector, you can define actually who is actually leading versus the ones that are lagging. And remember, companies are actually competitive by nature within their own sector, right? If you ask a utility to compare with a software company, it will feel that they are at a disadvantage. But for investors, being able actually to do this type of relative ranking of the companies can be fundamental because they need also some form of framework that is easily understandable. Because remember, actually also transition is one part of the risk that they manage. They manage other risks within their portfolios. So it must be a kind of homogeneous in the way basically they report actually their investment.
In the case of Malaysia, Sally, you mentioned in the beginning that the sort of the trend in the States, the state is to go away from planning, but economic planning is still pretty much writ large in the context of Malaysia, and this is where I think in a new area, a new space like transition financing, the government has I think aware of the needs to do a bit of hand holding by launching the energy transition roadmap earlier on, and this is where the government has identified together, in consultation with the key players in the private sector and listed companies, about 40 projects or mission-based projects that require financing, which will amount to about 1.3 trillion Malaysian ringgit in the next few years. So one is to crowdfunding, to financing to these areas, but also to indicate to the players in the marketplace that these are the investment that matters for the country to improve the renewable energy infrastructure and other related areas where improvements can be made, and that will change the game for the better.
Does Dr. Soraphol, do you want to share from your perspective any comments to conclude before Sally has any final questions?
I think what I agree with what SGX and Bursa has said. I think first thing first, we do what we can do first, right? Make the data available, give incentive for company to join on board, and we don't exclude anyone, and have them set a target and monitor. I mean, that's the only way that we can bring people on board. The government has a lot of roles to play in this in terms of setting the target industries, or like in getting many of the participants to come and work together. I think we have seen that progress in the past few years, at least for the Thailand case. One recent event that I think is quite good is that this March this year, our Ministry of Natural Resource, they have just do the public hearing of the draft law on climate change. So within that law, it gives a lot of new tools. It may be common in the West, but for Thailand, we didn't have emission trading allowance before, so this is new. And by doing this, it's just showing another seriousness of what the government is trying to tackle to get all these industries, be it green or be it transitions, to join on force. So I think people are quite aware and actively trying to do something at the moment.
Sally, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Victoria. And thank you for that. I don't really have any other questions other than if you could think of anything from your experience that is a lesson that those of us who are not moving along quite as quickly as you are could share. What about public perception of ESG in your countries? Is it well known and accepted, and is there a role for your exchanges in enabling more awareness in the public about this?
I think for awareness, people, the general public, are quite aware. But when you go down and to the dirty on what to do about it, right? What can company do, or what would my company in this industry, what are activities that can do and not hurting my bottom line, I mean, doesn't cost a lot. This is something that we encourage more knowledge sharing among companies. When I say capability building, we not just meaning getting people to study online. Those things, no, we are talking about forming the group of like-minded community of practitioner, because when one practitioner in one company, they try to do it and they meet all this dead end, but it's always the same dead end when you talk to other companies, and the solution multiply, but the number of questions remain the same. So they are getting more and more help by just talking to other people facing the same or similar issue. So this is something that we are trying to move beyond just awareness and getting people to do. But I think for this talk that we are in here, we are beyond that. We are about measuring. We are about the getting incentives. So we are to almost close the loop to the quite advanced. But never forget, there's a lot of community that's still on the second stage that don't know what to do, but they want to do.
But your role, Dr. Soraphol, in the exchanges as well, in terms of that dialogue.
As an exchange, for us, we provided guidebook by industry on what company can do. We sponsor some educational or seminar for the people in the listed company that are working on this field to jointly learn, and they can have networking and the sharing of their practice. We also provided, as I mentioned to you, the platform for entering their outcome of their progress in terms of ESG data. And of course, we are trying to promote more products more and more. So these are the 4 areas that I mentioned earlier. And we talk to other exchange because, of course, we learn from other exchange also.
Yeah, in the case of Malaysia, public awareness on environmental issues, it varies with the different sectors. For instance, if there was a survey done some time back, there's more than 80% awareness when it comes to issues like, conserving orangutan or protecting the landscape for the tigers, for instance. But when it comes to questions like, do you understand the causes of floods? What causes floods, for instance? Very low score, lower than 40%. So the cause and effect, what they do and how that would affect the environment is still, something that we need to develop further. But when it comes to the energy space in particular, we at Bursa Malaysia is very aware of the need to bring greater awareness among the market players, and that's why as of January we've just established the Sustainability Center of Excellence on sustainability. The System Center of Excellence the function is to bring more awareness among the ecosystem players about the need to move into this space, and also to bring some best practices, to sort of profile some of the leaders in this field, so that there's more confidence into moving this space. It's not just a matter of compliance, but also it's a great way of making money as well moving forward. So we want to bring that confidence to the market by establishing this Center for Sustainability Excellence. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Hezri. Did anyone else have anything to say?
Yes, maybe actually regarding Singapore and similar trends actually to what was mentioned actually by Thailand Stock Exchange and basically Bursa Malaysia. But I would also mention there is a generational path, right? So when basically the younger generation comes to the exchange, basically they ask a lot of questions about sustainability. And basically for them, it's a focus, right? Is what are we doing as a company to facilitate the implementation of sustainability? So I think actually the awareness is there, but it all goes back actually to the action. And as you can see in today's talk, basically we are not just actually promising about a greener world, we're actually explaining actually concrete actions. So sometimes it's a little bit boring. And that's where basically we may lose a little bit, I would say, the interest, but it's also to show the results, right? And the message of collaboration is actually very key. The danger would be actually a little bit like what can happen where you have actually some rules that are pushed to companies in the regions, right? Where basically companies are not ready to manage them. Then basically it becomes very disruptive and the transition becomes unfair, right? And that's where basically you see tensions. So here, I guess every government, but also, again, companies like an exchange are very well aware that tensions are sending messages and we need to be careful in implementation.
Very good. Thank you for that, Laurent. I think, thank you all for being here. Is Nandini still on the call?
I'm afraid Nandini had to leave us. But I think just to conclude, I think one of the things that I take away is the amazing amounts of efforts that's being done by the exchanges in the Asian region to encourage transition. And I think it's not only on the data front that we've discussed, but also in terms of education, but also in terms of sharing experience, helping issuers amongst themselves to benchmark against each other actually, and to encourage incentives in that way. And I think that too is really powerful. And I think we're seeing significant progress, not only in sharing data across the region and a common language, but it's quite exciting to see how much is being done and how much is being done to prepare also for requirements of Scope 3, even amongst members, which is really a great encouragement that they will be securing their future from this and making their region attractive for investment, because they will be at the forefront of of opportunities for alpha and for growth, which is fantastic.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that summary, Victoria. And thank you, everyone, for talking with me today and John Lothian News about transition finance and transition planning and how you and your governments and your investors, how your markets are all working toward net zero. It's really good to hear your stories, and others will learn from them. So thank you very much.